Hi everyone. In the week 3 lecture and the pre-recorded screencast that we're going to work through today, what I want to talk to you about is a continuation of something that we've talked about really in the first 2 weeks and that we moved on to in a little more depth when we were looking at the landscape diagram that you've been working on in the week 2 face-to-face sessions. And we saw that over on the right hand side of your diagram there was a column for government involvement in sport and funding in sport. So today's session really is mostly focused on trying to understand a bit more about government involvement in sport. On the one hand, I want to look at an economic rationale for government involvement in sport. I also want to look at evidence for the impact of government expenditure on sport. And to finish off the session, we'll also look at the voluntary sector in sport and the economic rationale for the voluntary sector's role in sport. So if you've worked through the week 3 workbook already and the start of that workbook before you've come to this screencast, you will have seen that I've already posed some of these questions or similar questions to these at the start of the workbook. So in today's session, through using economics and economic theory and arguments and evidence, I want to try and consider, should governments be involved in sport? And if so, in what way? How should they control sport? How should they fund sport? How should they fund elite sport, and what's their role in participation sport? I also want to consider arguments around whether there should be limits to government intervention in sport. And obviously, with this being a global economics module, we're going to use economic theory to help us consider these issues. So the first thing I want to look at is a concept in economics of something called externalities. And externalities really are those wider social benefits and costs, because externalities can have costs as well, which are associated with sport. And I particularly want to consider participation sport, although we will look at some externalities associated with spectator sport. After we've looked through some kind of instances of externalities, I want to finish off this screencast by looking at something called a logic model. And a logic model is a series of if-then cause and effect relationships. So our logic model is going to start off with the premise: if government invests in sport programs associated with health, what might some of the impacts be on individuals, on the healthcare system, and on wider society? If government invests in anti-crime projects using sport as a vehicle, what's the impact going to be on the individuals in those programs? But what's the wider social impact going to be on the communities that this is delivered in, and also on the police and criminal justice system budgets as well? So we're going to finish off by looking at a logic model, which will then lead us into Screencast 2, which is thinking about, well, what evidence is there that this logic model actually has hard facts and figures which we can use to say, well, here's a logical argument that if we spend this money on sport, these are some of the outputs or outcomes which we might achieve. Well, in Screencast 2 we're going to look at, well, what's the value of some of these outcomes and outputs from sport spending by governments. Okay, but first of all, I want to talk to you about externalities. So externalities are sometimes called neighbourhood effects or third-party effects. And what this means is when third parties or society at large, so a local community or an area around an intervention, is affected by a relationship or transaction between providers and consumers. And it's important to state that externalities can be positive, good things for the third parties. They provide benefits to the third parties, or they can provide negative effects or disbenefits to the third parties. So let's just think about some examples. And we'll start off with something which isn't really at all related to sport. So over here we see a factory producing some goods. Okay, so in economics we need to think about both costs and benefits, and not just kind of costs and benefits to the supplier, to the factory, the owner of the factory. There will be costs that he needs or that they need to spend, but there will be benefits in terms of income, and they need to make decisions about what products to make and what the costs and benefits of different products and different product mixes. But here I want to think about the impacts on kind of consumers. Okay, so let's think about this. And if we were in the classroom, I'd say to you, okay, well, looking at this factory, what are the personal costs or benefits? So if we think about the people who work in this factory, they give up their time to work in the factory. There is a cost, but the personal benefit to them is they're able to sell their labour for wages. So they've got jobs. So the factory provides them with employment. So we're linking back to the kind of circular flow of model here between kind of the production, the formal production sector of the economy and the household. Yeah, so the household sells its time, but they're paid in wages, which allows them to buy goods in the market economy. Okay, so there are some personal costs, giving up time, but the benefits are jobs. So what are the externalities in the community? Well, there are some positive externalities in the community around the factory, because the factory provides jobs, which means that people who work in the factory can spend their wages in shops and services, restaurants and businesses in that town, in that local community. So the factory, by employing people, becomes an important part of the local economy. Okay, so that's a clear benefit. And if the factory wasn't there, then that benefit wouldn't be there or would need to be replaced by something else. But if we look at this factory, there are some negative externalities as well, because look at the smoke that is being churned out by this factory. So the kind of negative externalities are that there is pollution. The air quality is not good, which could result in health conditions, birth defects, which itself puts a strain on the health system and the social services system and government expenditure in the area. So those are just some simple examples of costs and benefits, and I'm going to show you a few more, and we'll talk through some of these, because some of these have got things that are starting to get a bit closer to issues we consider when we talk about sport and physical activity. Okay, so here we've got a smoker and a silly picture of someone smoking God knows how many cigarettes. So what are the personal costs or benefits? Well, he's paying an awful lot of tax in this country on cigarettes, because the government seeks to discourage heavy smoking by placing high levels of tax on the purchase of cigarettes. So that's a disincentive to individuals to smoke. But the personal benefits are, this person probably enjoys it at some level, gets some utility or satisfaction from this. Well, what are the externalities? The externalities could be that he gets ill, and that has an impact on his family. If he has a family, because he might not be able to work, his income will drop. And the treatment of his illness, and we know that smoking is closely related with ischemic heart disease, coronary heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, and other conditions as well. So we know that, that the morbidity and mortality rates associated with smoking are significantly increased for smokers. So that obviously puts a cost on the health service. And this is another reason why governments seek to tax cigarettes to kind of provide disincentives. They also kind of control the demand and supply side by limiting who can sell cigarettes and who they can be sold to. And they also do something to try to kind of depress the demand side by putting out public information films about the damage that smoking can do to your lungs and your health. But here we can see that there are some clear externalities as well. So diet, personal costs and benefits. It tastes great. It fills you up. There is utility in that. The personal costs are that if you have a poor diet, you eat the wrong things, your personal health will suffer. If your personal health suffers, and we know that through poor diet we have obesity, type 2 diabetes, certain types of colon cancer and stomach cancer, that there are, as well as the disbenefits to the individual, there are negative externalities for society as well and for health. There is also kind of jobs in the fast food industry and the hospitality industry that sells these things, so there are positive externalities as well. Education. What are the personal costs or benefits? If we were in a lecture room now, I could ask you, what is this costing you? What is this year costing you? But you're making that investment in your personal capital, your personal human capital, in the hope that it will make you more employable in the job market, so you are able to sell your labour for a higher wage because you've got rare skills, or skills and knowledge which are at a premium. So there are some costs. So you are foregoing earning this year in a full-time job because you are working. You are paying fees, so that's an additional cost. But also the benefits, and this is a durable consumption good education, the benefits should return in future years. And we looked last week in the lecture at evidence that Sheffield Hallam University Sport Injuries Research Centre had done, which looked at the benefits of having a degree and then the benefits of also having a degree but playing sport or volunteering in sport. Okay, so there are clear personal costs and clear personal benefits. What are the externalities? Well, a better educated society will have, hopefully, more productive individuals able to work better to produce more wealth. And if individuals produce wealth, there is more wealth circulating in the economy. One of the big arguments for the expansion of higher education, so when I went to university as an undergraduate, about 10 or 15% of people my age went on to higher education. Now it's 3 times higher than that. And the argument is that we are moving into a knowledge economy. Britain and other Western industrialised countries cannot compete with cheap labour in developing countries. We need to specialise in high value added jobs which require high levels of technical skills and knowledge which can be acquired in higher education. So the nature of the economy is changing, so we need higher education and we need more people coming out with better qualifications because they can be more productive and provide benefit to the economy through generating wealth. And if there's more money in the economy, generally society as a whole benefits. There are more jobs, better paid jobs. Government can generate more tax and revenues to provide better public services, and so on. So sports participation. what are the personal costs and benefits of sports participation? Well, next week we'll talk about time costs and the demand for leisure time, and that's a big issue for sport. There are also financial costs of memberships, equipment. So for this sport event, then there's the travel to, the entry, the training. So there are all these personal costs, but the benefits are a sense of achievement and enjoyment, which you might get from this, which might lead to mental health and well-being, which might also have physical health benefits, which in turn have other economic benefits for individuals. Okay, so there are clear personal costs and benefits. The wider externalities can be, well, here we've got a sport event, so all these people running down the Champs-Élysées in France, a lot of these will be visiting France and visiting Paris. So there's an economic impact of visitors to the Parisian and the French economy, bringing new spending into that economy, which creates and supports jobs and employment within the local economy. But also some of the people running down the Champs-Élysées there will be French, will be Parisian, and through training and taking part in sport, they're becoming healthier, becoming more productive, so it reduces costs on the health budget. So there are some clear externalities there. There may be negative externalities as well in terms of, the costs which need to be invested into marshalling and providing the route and police and so on. And this is also covered in this next externality, which is to do with sport spectating. Well, what are the personal costs or benefits? Well, you need to travel to the game to watch football. So there's a time cost and a travel cost, and travel costs, as we saw when we looked at components that make up the sport industry, sport-related travel is a significant part of the overall sports economy. Okay, so there are costs. There are the season ticket costs as well, the ticket and entry costs. But the personal benefits are, well, questionable for these individuals, but for most sports fans, watching and having some empathy and enjoyment, and even some of the misery and suffering that comes along with being a kind of sports supporter and a sports fan. Okay. What are some of the externalities? Well, when we looked at the previous slide, we saw a major event and we said there are jobs in the economy. So if this is a football match, then people attending the football match, and particularly away supporters, are bringing money and spending into the local economy, which wouldn't be there if that football match was on and they were not travelling from their town or city to the town or city that the football match is happening at. So there are jobs and employment which are associated with the spectating. There are the direct jobs at the football club and in the stadium. There are the indirect jobs in the local economy, in the pubs, in the bars, in the restaurants, in the food, in the shops, in the hotels where these people may be visiting and staying during the time that they're in the city to support their team. Okay, so those are some of the externalities. There are clearly bad externalities here as well. So there are the policing costs, and here we see, it might not be able to say, but this looks like the English disease, which is football hooliganism happening. And in order to kind of control this, then there is a kind of cost to the local community who pay taxation for the local police service, and the local police are deployed and paid to be at that ground. And it's not just the football clubs that pay the cost of that, it's also the local community. And if those police are there, then they can't be somewhere else doing other kind of policing activity. So that's the idea of externalities. And I said that I would finish this mini lecture or this screencast with a discussion of a logic model. So this logic model looks at, if we invest sport and increase sports participation, we can lead to increased health and fitness, increased mental health, increase identity with the local community, and these are kind of immediate outputs, if you like. If we can achieve these, and let's just look down the health one here, if we can increase physical health and fitness, we can reduce healthcare costs. If we can do that, then we can decrease overall healthcare costs. Yeah. So there are a number of things here. I'm not going to work through all of them, but you can see this logic model. Now, I'm going to close this screencast here, but as we move on to screencast 2, we are going to look at some evidence which is based on the Sport Industry Research Centre's work for Sport England, which looks at trying to ascribe some financial value to some of these externalities associated with sports participation and the sport industry. So in Screencast 2, we're going to look at some of the evidence for this logic model. Okay, we're going to try and put some value to some of those wider social externalities.